music as the cat's meow. And there's been ads in the paper for months for a movie starring Al Jolson. He's going to talk and sing. Boy, I've got to see that. There goes Schwartz in his Hupmobile. He sure loves that horn.
Growing up, I always knew that Schwartz's Hupmobile was an automobile. But I always just assumed that Hupmobile was slang. Kinda like saying, there goes Schwartz and his jalopy. You know, just like a folksy way of saying car or something. As it turns out, I was wrong, and the Hupmobile was a very real brand of cars that was popular in its day until it wasn't. Robert C. Hupp, born in 1877, didn't take long to throw himself into the automobile industry. Starting at the age of 25, he worked 1 year each at Olds Motor Works, Ford Motor Co., and Regal Motor Co. as a designer. After just 3 years of combined experience in the industry, Hupp decided that it was time to strike out on his own and start his own car company. But hey, that was how new the industry was. And so on November 9th, 1908, the Hupp Motor Car Corporation was born. He wasted no time either, because just 3 months later, the company showed off their very first prototype at the 1909 Detroit Auto Show. It was the Model 20 Hupmobile, or as some called it, the Hupp 20. It sported a modest 4-cylinder, 17-horsepower engine, held 11 gallons of gas, and was open for orders for anyone looking to spend the $750 it cost. In 1910, to promote the Hupp 20, a 4-passenger version of the car was sent on a tour around the world. Over the following year, it traveled to 26 nations, both by road and by boat. Supposedly, 14 of the 26 nations it visited had never actually seen an automobile in person before that point. That specific car still exists today and is on display at the Crawford Car Aviation Museum in Cleveland, Ohio. 1,600 Hupp 20s were sold in its first year, prompting the company to move to a larger factory where it would go on to sell over 3 times as many in the following year. Today, those numbers are small, but again, this was a fairly new industry. Hupmobiles began to earn a reputation for being affordable and reliable cars. So it's no surprise that John Progress's neighbor, Schwartz, would have one. Over the following decade, newer and even more dependable models were introduced. In order to promote the 1916 Model N Hupmobile, one was driven to all 48 state capitals over the course of about 4 months and spanning over 18,000 miles. Again, today that wouldn't be the most impressive feat, but interstate travel like that was not the norm in 1916. In 1920, the owner of a Hupmobile dealership in Canton, Ohio by the name of Ralph Hay held a series of meetings in his showroom. Beyond the dealership, Hay also owned the Canton Bulldogs, an Ohio football team. He and his peers, who also owned football teams, met because they wanted to organize a formal league for the sport. It was reportedly on the hood of a Hupmobile that the papers were signed to form the American Professional Football Conference. Just 2 years later, that group would be renamed to the National Football League. So what happened to the Hupmobile? It was reliable, it was affordable, it was not the most popular brand, but it was up there. Well, towards the end of the 1920s, the company began to set its sights on more expensive markets. Later models featured more powerful 8-cylinder engines, which meant a more expensive automobile that also happened to consume more fuel. They abandoned their more modest 4-cylinder designs, so they were seen as leaving behind that reputation of affordability and reliability for a flashier consumer base. And hey, it might have worked out for them. Other companies have pulled it off. Except Hupmobile happened to have made their move just before the infamous stock market crash of 1929 and the onset of the Great Depression. It was perhaps the worst possible time to lean into more expensive products. With that lost reputation and the country struggling economically, Hupmobile sales suffered. It took a decade of steady decline, but by 1940 the company would undergo bankruptcy reorganization, and the Hupp Motor Car Company would cease automobile operations. They'd instead begin to manufacture car parts for other companies, before eventually fading into obscurity as a parts manufacturer for appliances. Now, it's worth noting that the Hupmobile wasn't mentioned in the original Carousel of Progress. It wasn't until the 1994 refurbishment, which included a new script and voice cast, until the reference was included. It makes sense as a reference too. While it would have been more likely for Schwartz to own a Ford or an Oldsmobile, they're both brands that still exist today, which might have been something Disney wanted to avoid referencing. At least not without that sweet sponsorship money. Beyond that, it works well because the Hutmobile is an increasingly obscure reference to something that only existed for a couple of decades. It's a small piece of history that places the characters and the guests into a very specific point in time. And that's what the Carousel of Progress is all about.